Yeah, Mike, we need to move fast on this. The house should appraise for at least 400,000, maybe more with the recent improvements Dad made to the kitchen and the new roof. I froze in my late husband's office, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid my son might hear it from the kitchen. I pressed myself against the door, straining to hear every word of David's phone conversation. No, she won't be a problem. Mom's in no state to make major decisions right now. You know how it is with grief? People get overwhelmed, confused. We're looking at assisted living facilities this weekend. Lisa found this place called Sunset Manor that has availability. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My own son was talking about me like I was already gone, like I was some problem to be solved, rather than a person with my own thoughts and feelings. Please subscribe. It really encourages me to keep sharing these incredible stories with you all. Kindly let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing where my sweethearts are tuning in. Trust me, David's voice got clearer as he moved closer to the kitchen island. We need to liquidate everything quickly. Dad's business, the house, all of it. The longer we wait, the more complicated it gets. Plus, Mom's going to need that money for care. I'm Margaret Blackhorse, and 1 week after I buried my husband of 40 years, I discovered my children had already planned my entire future without me. What I'm about to tell you will shock you. And by the end, you'll understand why I'm grateful I never told them about the $250,000 my husband hid from them. But first, let me ask you something. Did you ever think the people who love you most could become your biggest threat? If you've ever felt betrayed by your family, share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Let me paint you the scene of that terrible Tuesday morning. It's October, exactly 7 days after we buried Robert Bob Blackhorse. The morning air is crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and wood smoke from someone's chimney down the street. The leaves outside my kitchen window are burning orange and red, the same colors Bob loved to paint when he was alive. I'm sitting in Bob's home office. This little room at the back of our modest 2-story house where he used to pay bills and plan his construction projects. The room still smells like him. Old Spice aftershave, coffee, and the faint scent of sawdust that seemed to cling to everything he owned. I'm surrounded by sympathy flowers that are already starting to wilt. White lilies from the Methodist church where we were married, yellow roses from his old construction crew, and a massive arrangement of chrysanthemums from our neighbors, the Hendersons. I was trying to organize Bob's papers when I heard David's voice from the kitchen. My eldest son, a 35-year-old son, has always been the take-charge type. But this wasn't his gentle, grieving tone he'd been using with me all week. This was his business voice, sharp and efficient. If you're finding this story relatable, share it with someone who might be going through something similar. Kindly subscribe and support our community. Lisa and I already talked to Mom about it yesterday. Well, kind of. We planted the seeds. She's so overwhelmed with grief, she'll go along with whatever we suggest. She always deferred to Dad on the big decisions anyway. That last comment hit me like a slap. Yes, Bob and I had made major decisions together, but that was partnership, not dependence. There's a difference between consulting someone you trust and being unable to think for yourself. But then David said something that made my blood run cold. The thing is, Mike, Dad always kept Mom pretty sheltered from the business side of things. She doesn't really understand finances, investments, any of that. She was a teacher. Good at what she did, but not exactly business-minded. I taught high school mathematics for 30 years. I understood compound interest better than most people. I'd balanced our household budget, managed our savings account, and helped countless students understand financial literacy. But to David, I was just a helpless woman who needed managing. So we're thinking we'll handle the estate sale, get the house ready for market, and present her with a simple plan. Sunset Manor costs about $4,000 a month, and if we liquidate everything quickly, there should be enough to cover her expenses for maybe 8 to 10 years. 8 to 10 years. They'd calculated how long I was worth keeping alive. Does anyone ever underestimate your abilities like this? Tell me in the comments about a time when someone assumed you couldn't handle something you were perfectly capable of doing. And if this is making you angry on my behalf, smash that like button because you haven't heard the worst of it yet. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out loud. My own children, my babies that I'd carried, nursed through fevers, helped with homework, celebrated graduations with, they were planning my entire future without me. But then, sitting there in Bob's chair surrounded by his papers, I remembered something. 3 months before Bob died, when the cancer was getting worse, but he was still trying to be strong for everyone, he'd called me into this very office. It was a Sunday evening in July, and the sun was setting behind the massive oak tree in our backyard. Bob was sitting at his desk, but he looked smaller somehow, diminished by the illness that was slowly claiming him. "Maggie?" he'd said, using the nickname he'd given me when we were dating in high school. "I need to show you something, but you have to promise me you'll never tell the kids about this unless you're absolutely sure they'll do right by you." He'd pulled out a small brass key from his desk drawer, the kind that opens safety deposit boxes. His hands were so thin by then, but they were steady as he held it out to me. "I've been setting aside money for years, sweetheart. Not much at first, just 100 here and there. But it added up. I wanted to make sure you'd never have to depend on anyone if something happened to me. Did someone you love ever protect you in ways you didn't even realize you needed? Share a story in the comments about someone who prepared for your future without you knowing. And if you're curious about what Bob hid, make sure you're subscribed, because this revelation will blow your mind." I remember looking at him, this man who'd worked 60-hour weeks for most of our marriage, who'd never taken a vacation that didn't involve visiting family. When had he found money to set aside? "Bob, you don't need to worry about me. The kids will." "No," he'd interrupted, and his voice had a firmness I rarely heard. "This is just for you, Maggie. Promise me you'll keep it secret until you're sure, absolutely sure, that they have your best interests at heart." I'd promised him, of course, but I thought he was being overly cautious. Our children loved us. They'd never do anything to hurt me. Sitting there listening to David plan my life like I was already incompetent, I realized Bob knew our children better than I did. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I got dressed up, not funeral clothes, but my good navy blue suit, the one I wore to parent-teacher conferences when I was still teaching. I put on my pearl earrings, my gold watch, and my wedding ring, which I'd barely been able to look at since the funeral. I drove to First National Bank downtown, the same bank where Bob and I had opened our first joint checking account 42 years ago. Mrs. Patterson, the same teller who'd been there for 20 years, recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Blackhorse, I'm so sorry for your loss. Bob was such a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I need to access our safety deposit box today." My hands were trembling as I signed the paperwork. What if Bob had been exaggerating? What if there wasn't much there? The vault was cold and quiet. Mrs. Patterson inserted her key, I inserted mine, and together we opened box 247. What I saw inside made my knees weak. Have you ever discovered something that completely changed your life? Tell me in the comments about a moment when everything shifted for you. And if you want to know what shocked me so much, share this video and stay tuned because you won't believe what Bob had done. Neat stacks of $100 bills, bound with rubber bands, gold coins in protective plastic cases, and a manila envelope with my name written on it in Bob's careful handwriting. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter that started with, "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you never needed to come here." But it was the other papers that made my heart race. Property deeds for addresses I didn't recognize. Investment statements from accounts I'd never heard of. Bank statements showing monthly deposits going back 15 years, and business documents for something called Black Horse Holdings LLC. Bob had been secretly investing in real estate for 15 years. 3 rental houses across town, all owned through the LLC he'd established. The monthly rental income was $4,800, enough for me to live comfortably without depending on anyone. The cash in the box totaled $200,000. The gold coins were worth at least another $25,000. But there was more. Investment accounts with regional banks, CDs that renewed automatically, and a stock portfolio focused on utility companies. Bob had created an entire financial ecosystem designed to support me if I ever needed to stand on my own. I sat in that cold vault and cried. Not from grief this time, but from gratitude so profound, it felt like a physical force. Bob had loved me enough to plan for a scenario where I might need protection from our own children. The letter explained everything. How he'd started setting aside money after David graduated law school, and Bob noticed his son's increasing focus on wealth and status. How he'd been troubled by Lisa's comments about estate planning. How he'd realized that our children saw their parents' assets as a future inheritance rather than resources belonging to living people with their own needs. "I hope I'm wrong, Maggie," the letter said. "I hope you never need any of this, and our children prove to be the caring, selfless people we raise them to be. But if I'm right, if they try to control your life or make decisions for you, you now have the power to choose your own path." When I finally emerged from that vault, Mrs. Patterson looked at me with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" "I'm better than all right," I told her. "I'm free." Have you ever felt truly free for the first time in your life? Tell me about that moment in the comments. And if you're wondering how I use this freedom against my scheming children, share this video and keep watching because the confrontation is coming. That evening, David and Lisa came over for dinner, just like they had every Tuesday since the funeral. They thought they were managing me, checking on poor Mom who couldn't possibly handle life alone. I made Bob's favorite meal, pot roast with carrots and potatoes. I used our good china, the pattern we'd received as a wedding gift 40 years ago. "Mom, you didn't have to go through all this trouble," Lisa said, giving me a hug. "She's always been the gentler one, the nurse who thinks she needs to take care of everyone. It's no trouble, sweetheart. I like cooking for my family." David arrived still scrolling through his phone, barely looking up to greet me. "Sorry I'm running late, Mom. Crazy day at the office." Did you ever notice how some people use busyness as a way to avoid real conversation? "Mom, we need to talk about some practical things," David finally said, putting his phone down. "Lisa and I have been doing research, and we think we've found some good options for you." He pulled out a folder and spread glossy brochures across my dining room table. Photos of smiling elderly people playing cards and tending gardens. "Sunset Manor is really nice," Lisa added. "They have a waiting list, but David knows someone who can get you in quickly." I kept my voice steady. "That's very thoughtful of you both. But I'm curious, what made you think I needed assisted living?" They exchanged a look. They'd rehearsed this conversation. "Mom," Lisa said, reaching across to pat my hand, "you shouldn't have to worry about maintaining this big house all by yourself. And Dad's business, it's complicated. David's been looking into it, and there are debts, taxes, and employees to pay." I decided to test them. "Speaking of the business, I found some papers in your father's office yesterday. Old contracts, investment records. Some looked important, but I couldn't make sense of them." David barely looked up from his phone. "Dad wasn't much of a record keeper, Mom. Don't worry about any of that paperwork. I'm handling everything with the estate attorney." And there it was, the dismissal, the assumption that I couldn't possibly understand anything important. But what if some of those papers are important? What if there are assets or investments I don't know about? "Mom," David said, his voice taking on the patient tone you'd use with a confused child, "Dad told us about everything significant. If there were major investments, we'd know about them." That's when I knew for certain. They weren't protecting me, they were protecting themselves. "The thing is, Mom," Lisa continued, "you're still processing Dad's death. Making big decisions right now isn't healthy. That's why David and I want to handle the business side of things." David put his phone down and looked at me directly. "I've already talked to a realtor. Jerry Morrison? You remember him, Dad's old friend? He thinks we can have the house sold within 60 days. And once we sell the house and settle Dad's debts," Lisa added, "there should be enough left over to cover your assisted living costs for several years." "Several years?" I repeated. "Well, yes," David said, looking uncomfortable. "Dad's business has more debt than we initially thought, and this house needs significant work before we can sell it. But don't worry, we've got it all figured out." My entire future, reduced to a spreadsheet that served their convenience. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled and said, "You two have put so much thought into this. Let me sleep on it." Have you ever had to bite your tongue when someone was trying to manipulate you? Tell me in the comments about the most difficult time you had to stay quiet to protect yourself. And if you're on the edge of your seat waiting for my revenge, subscribe and hit the notification bell because you won't want to miss what happens next. The next morning, I called Jim Morrison, not Jerry the realtor, but Jim Morrison, Bob's actual best friend and our attorney. "Margaret, I'm so sorry about Bob," Jim said. "How are you holding up?" "I'm doing better than expected, Jim. But I need to understand something. My children seem to think I need to sell the house immediately and move to assisted living. Is that legally required?" There was a long pause. "Margaret, are you telling me David and Lisa are pressuring you to sell the house?" "They're not pressuring exactly. They're managing." "Well, let me be very clear. The house is half yours according to your deed. You have every legal right to stay there as long as you want. And as for Bob's business, did you know it's actually quite profitable? He's been paying down debt steadily for the past 5 years." This was news to me. According to David, the business was struggling. According to Jim, it was thriving. I spent the rest of the day making phone calls. I called Kevin Morrison, the property manager Bob had mentioned in his letter. I called the banks where Bob had investment accounts. By evening, I had a complete picture. I was not the helpless widow my children believed me to be. I was a woman with options, resources, and the legal right to make my own decisions. I called David and Lisa and asked them to come over. "I've made some decisions. We need to talk." They arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, probably expecting me to sign whatever paperwork they'd prepared. David had his briefcase, Lisa had her gentle smile, and I had my secret weapon, the truth. "I've been doing some thinking, and I've decided I'm not moving to assisted living." David's face went red. "Mom, we've been through this. You can't maintain this house alone. It's not practical. And emotionally," Lisa added, "staying here might prevent you from processing your grief properly." I looked at both of them, my children, my babies, and made a choice that would change our relationship forever. "I overheard your phone call with the realtor, David." The room went completely silent. "I heard you planning my entire future without me. I heard you discussing how to manage me, how to convince me, how to make decisions for me like I was already incompetent." David started to speak, but I held up my hand. "I also talked to Jim Morrison, the real Jim Morrison, your father's attorney. It turns out your father's business is worth quite a bit more than you calculated. And this house? It's half mine, no matter what you think." Lisa tried her nursing voice. "Mom, you're upset. We were just trying to help." "No," I said firmly. "You were trying to control. There's a difference." I stood and walked to the mantelpiece where Bob's photo sat, surrounded by sympathy cards. "But here's what really hurts. Your father spent 15 years making sure I'd never have to depend on anyone, including my own children, if something happened to him. He knew something I didn't want to believe." "What are you talking about?" David demanded. "I'm talking about the fact that I'm not the helpless widow you think I am. I'm talking about the fact that your father left me more secure than you could possibly imagine. And I'm talking about the fact that you'll never know exactly how secure I am, because you've proven I can't trust you with that information." David stood up, his composure completely gone. "This is ridiculous. You're being emotional and irrational. Dad's gone, Mom. We're your family now, and we know what's best for you." "What's best for me or what's best for you? I'm 62 years old, not 92. I taught school for 30 years, raised 2 children, helped build a business from nothing, and kept this family together through every crisis we've faced. I am not incompetent, I am not helpless, and I am not moving anywhere." "Mom, please," Lisa said through tears. "We love you. We just want to take care of you. Then trust me to take care of myself." I walked to the front door and opened it. "I think you both need to go home and think about whether you see me as your mother or as a problem to be solved. When you figure that out, you're welcome to come back." They left. David with his briefcase full of useless paperwork, Lisa with her tears and wounded feelings. I closed the door and stood in the hallway of my house, for the first time in a week, feeling like myself again. Have you ever had to kick family members out of your house? Tell me about the most difficult boundary you've had to set with loved ones. And if you're wondering what happened next, subscribe and share this video because the aftermath is just as dramatic. But the story doesn't end there. Standing up for yourself has consequences, some painful, some beautiful. David didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. When he finally called, it was through his secretary asking if I was ready to be reasonable. I told her to tell him I was being perfectly reasonable. I was choosing to live my own life. Lisa tried a different approach, dropping by unannounced with groceries I hadn't asked for. "Mom, I'm just worried about you. This house is so big, and you're all alone." But I wasn't alone. Mrs. Henderson from next door, who I'd known for 20 years but never really talked to, turned out to be a widow herself. She'd lost her husband 5 years earlier. "The hardest part," she told me over coffee, "isn't the grief. It's convincing everyone else that you're still a complete person capable of making your own decisions." She introduced me to other women in similar situations, widows who'd refused to be managed by well-meaning family members, women who'd discovered that life doesn't end when your circumstances change. I also reached out to Kevin Morrison and asked to meet the tenants in Bob's rental properties. Bob had been right. They weren't just tenants, they were family. The Thompsons had 2 young children and had been struggling financially when Bob reduced their rent rather than evict them. The Martinez family were elderly themselves, and Bob had spent his own money making their home accessible when Mr. Martinez started using a wheelchair. The third property housed a young single mother named Sarah, working 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school. Bob had kept her rent low and helped with childcare when her babysitter fell through. "Your husband saved my life," Sarah told me. "Not just financially, but he believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." I realized Bob's hidden assets weren't just financial. They were human. He'd been building a network of relationships, a community of people who cared about each other. 6 months later, I made a decision that surprised everyone. I started dating. His name is Frank Clearwater, a retired teacher like me. We met at a financial planning seminar for seniors. Yes, I was educating myself about managing Bob's investments, another thing my children assumed I couldn't handle. Frank is 70, a widower with grown children who live across the country. He treats me like a complete person rather than a problem to be solved. We go to the movies, take walks, cook dinner together sometimes. Nothing dramatic, just companionship with someone who respects my autonomy. When I told David and Lisa about Frank, their reactions were illuminating. "Mom, don't you think it's a little soon?" Lisa asked. "Soon for what? For happiness? For companionship? For living my life?" David was more direct. "Are you sure this guy isn't just after Dad's money?" The irony was breathtaking. My own children, who'd been planning to liquidate my assets, were worried about someone else taking advantage of my finances. "David," I said calmly, "Frank doesn't know anything about my financial situation, and it's going to stay that way until I decide otherwise, just like with you." But the real revelation came a year later, when David's marriage started falling apart. He showed up at my door on a Thursday evening, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His wife Jennifer had been having an affair and was filing for divorce, demanding half of everything. "I don't understand how this happened," he said, his voice breaking. "I gave her everything she wanted. I worked 60-hour weeks to pay for the house she wanted, the cars, the vacations. I thought if I just provided enough, she'd be happy. Sound familiar?" "David," I said gently, "when was the last time you asked Jennifer what she actually wanted rather than assuming you knew?" And then I asked him the question that changed everything between us. "How do you think it feels to have someone you love make major decisions about your life without consulting you?" The silence was profound. I could see him making connections, understanding for the first time how his treatment of Jennifer mirrored his treatment of me. "I wanted to take care of her," he whispered. "Taking care of someone and controlling them aren't the same thing, sweetheart." Have you ever had a moment when someone finally understood how they'd hurt you? Comment about the most meaningful apology you've ever received. And if you want to see how this family story ends, make sure to subscribe and share. We talked until dawn. Really talked, maybe for the first time since he was a child. He told me about the pressure he felt to provide, to solve everyone's problems. I told him about the loneliness of being treated like a burden rather than a person. "I'm sorry, Mom," he finally said. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was really just protecting myself from having to deal with uncertainty." That's when I told him about Bob's preparations, about the financial security I'd discovered, about the community I'd built. Not to hurt him, but to help him understand that protection and control aren't the same thing. David's divorce was finalized 6 months later. It was painful and expensive, but educational. He started therapy and began examining his need to control rather than collaborate. Lisa's journey was different. She gradually began to understand that her nursing instincts, while admirable in a medical setting, could be suffocating in personal relationships. The turning point came when I had minor surgery. Lisa immediately went into caregiver mode, taking time off work, moving into my house, hovering over me like I was in intensive care. "Lisa," I finally said, "I love you, but you're making me feel like an invalid." "I'm just trying to help," she protested. "I know, but help means doing what I need, not what you think I need." We had a long conversation about the difference between caring for someone and caring about someone. Caring for someone assumes they can't care for themselves. Caring about someone means supporting their ability to care for themselves. Today, 3 years after Bob's death, my relationship with my children is better than it's ever been. Not because we agree on everything, but because we respect each other's autonomy. David includes me in decisions that affect me, but doesn't try to make decisions for me. Lisa offers support without assuming I need to be rescued. I still live in the house Bob and I shared. I've made changes, converted his office into a reading room, planted a garden, updated the kitchen. The house is evolving, just like I am. Frank and I are taking things slowly. We've been together for 2 years now. We're both adults who've learned that happiness doesn't require dramatic gestures. Sometimes happiness is just having someone to share coffee with in the morning. The rental properties continue to provide steady income, and I've learned to manage them myself. It turns out I'm pretty good at business. Something my children never would have discovered if they'd succeeded in wrapping me in protective bubble wrap. But the most important thing I've learned is this: love without respect isn't love at all. It's control wearing a caring mask. Bob's greatest gift wasn't the money he saved or the properties he bought. It was his recognition that I might need to stand on my own against people who claimed to know what was best for me. He loved me enough to prepare me for a fight I didn't even know was coming. Did you ever love someone enough to prepare them for battles you won't be there to fight? Share your thoughts in the comments about the deepest kind of love. Let me leave you with one final question. If something happened to you tomorrow, do the people in your life see you as a person capable of making your own decisions, or as a problem that needs to be managed? Think about that question seriously, because the answer might surprise you. And if you don't like the answer, start changing the dynamic now while you still have the power to do so. Don't wait until you're vulnerable to discover who really respects your autonomy and who just wants to control your choices. If this story resonated with you, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me what part of this story hit you the hardest. And make sure to subscribe to Granny Dorothy Stories for more real family drama that will make you think twice about the people in your own life. Remember, you're stronger than you think, wiser than they know, and more capable than anyone gives you credit for. The most radical thing you can do in this world is refuse to let other people's fears about your capabilities become limitations on your life. Thanks for listening to my story. This is Margaret Blackhorse. And I'll see you in the next Granny Dorothy story.